Morning, guys. This is Scott Fresener with T-Biz Network. I'd like to thank you for joining my webinar. This is going to be a training webinar on T-Seps 3, and that's our newest, latest, greatest program. I'm going to assume that you really don't know much about T-Seps. I know a lot of you probably have T-Seps 2.0, and you're going to watch this webinar to catch some of the new features of T-Seps 3.0. And if you don't know much about T-Seps 3.0, I encourage you to watch the video on the webinar we did Friday that was the introduction to T-Seps 3.0. So catch that. It's online now. It's on YouTube. It's about 45 minutes in length, and that'll show you the basics of T-Seps 3.0. I'm in Photoshop CS6 right now, and T-Seps 3.0 only works in CS6 and CC, and the reason for that is that there's some new features in CS6, and Adobe made some changes on the developers level where I can actually do a lot more graphical things in CS6 and CC that I couldn't do in CS5 or earlier. So T-Seps is the latest, greatest generation of T-Seps 2.0, and it's got a graphical interface. Let's talk quickly about how we install T-Seps. The issue I get a lot is people will sometimes send me an email and they'll say they're having a problem, and my response will sometimes often be, did you read the manual? The response is typically, you know what the response is. No, I haven't looked at the manual. And people are looking for an icon on their desktop. They're looking for the program to be an executable program. T-Seps is a plugin for Photoshop. When you install T-Seps, if you're a PC user on either the CD or the download, you got a file called T-Seps 3.0 installer.exe. And by the way, I'm doing this webinar on a PC right now, so I can't show you the Mac installation. And I'm within Photoshop, so I'm just showing you what the file looks like. If you double-click on this file outside of Photoshop, either from a download, and it may be a zip file if you downloaded it, because there's also a quick start instruction sheet with the download. So if you download the file, you've got a little direction sheet with it, but once you unzip that file, you've got a file called T-Seps 3.0 installer.exe. If you double-click on this, it's a real standard Windows installer, and it'll just go through the paces and it'll install all the files in the correct location. If you're a Mac user, it's a installer package, and it's also zipped up, and it's got a quick start readme. So if you downloaded it, you get a file that looks like this. It may have a similar name depending on the download, and when you then double click on it, it's going to unzip the file. It's going to be a regular Mac installer package, and it's going to just go through its paces, and it's going to install everything in the right location. Now when it's done installing, it'll make on your computer a folder called T-Seps 3. Notice that this is actually in a subfolder called T-Seps 3.0 webinar files. This is not where the program puts it. I'm just showing you what it looks like. And basically, this folder ends up on the C drive on a PC or in the applications folder on a Mac. And it has all the key files. It has actually the distressed overlays, so when you run the distress routine, it'll ask you where the distressed overlays are. They're in this folder. It has the various actions and the various plugins, and has backups of them, so you can have them either on a CD or in this folder. It has the ink properties for the CMYK inks for some of the ink companies. It has the graphics for the job proof routine, which are the little t-shirt graphics, because when you run the job proof routine, it will ask you where is the shirt graphic. And by the way, these are standard PNG files, and when you run the job proof routine, you can actually use your own files. You can create your own little t-shirt graphics. They can be more freeform, more realistic looking, as long as they have a transparent background and they're PNG. But we've given you just two basic ones to use for the job proof module. There's also the manual. And again, I encourage you to read the manual. It has a great section on installation. It goes through the step-by-steps of how to unlock the program, and you'll save yourself a lot of time and a lot of pain and strain if you read the manual, because most of my support emails are from people that are getting errors, and the errors are because the file wasn't prepared correctly. It either had layers going on or it was CMYK, and they kind of missed the real important points of running routines in T-Seps. So I want you to crack open the manual. It's actually not too bad. We'll just bring it up here. It's 85 pages now. I updated it. And it's got lots of little pictures, lots of stuff going on. Don't be overwhelmed by the size of it. Just breeze through it real quick, especially the getting started, the quick start section. It kind of tells you about how to use the program. It has a section if you're in a hurry. If you're a power user, it has a section for you that says, okay, you know what you're doing. Maybe you know T-Seps 1.0 or 2.0. Here's how to get going really quickly with T-Seps 3.0. So I encourage you to crack the manual open and take a look at it. Now, The T-Seps 3 folder also has a folder called samples, and there's a few pre-done samples. If you're brand new to this kind of program and don't know what a layers file looks like, I've given you some test samples right here. And there's also a folder called Team Viewer. Team Viewer is an online viewing program that it's for Mac or PC. So on the Mac version, yours will look slightly different than this. But when you click on this, it'll actually open a program called Team Viewer where I can log onto your computer once you give me the password, and we can do an online session. And this is built into the program right here. T-Seps loves to do stuff like this. If its strength is this kind of separation. And the file could start off as a Corel file. This file started off, I'm sure, as an AI or Corel file. I got it from a customer, but somewhere it started off as a file like that. It can be a file that was built in Adobe Illustrator, like this Harley file. It can be a file like this Classic Cars built in Photoshop. It can be a file built in a variety of programs. This webinar will be a quick training webinar. We try and keep it to less than an hour. And so we aren't going to cover every little nut and bolt of T-Seps, because the truth is you're going to use some of the program all the time. I do separations every day, and I use a couple of routines for most of my stuff. T-Seps works on Mac or PC. Now, once you install the program, you're kind of home free, but not quite. I'm going to close the T-Seps panel out. T-Seps works in the panels section of Photoshop. Once you install T-Seps and you open Photoshop, you're going to get a little window that says Try or Authorize. If you click on Try, you can use the program for 20 days until you get the unlock. If you click on Authorize, it generates a request code for your computer. I can't tell you how many requests we get from people that say, send me the unlock, and then we have to go back and email you and say, the unlock starts with you. You've got to generate a request code for your computer. So please, when you see the word Authorize, click on it. It gives you a number, send that number in, and then we send that back based on that computer. And by the way, you can put T-Seps on 2 computers, Mac or PC. But it works in the panels section. So once you open Photoshop and get past the Try Authorize window, you click on Window, come down to Extensions. This is called a panel extension, and you'll see T-Seps right there. Now, if you're a current user of T-Seps 1.0, 2.0, or Fast Films, you know that the program worked in the Actions panel. T-Seps 3.0 does not work in the Actions panel. It works in its own panel called an Extension panel. If you're a current user of T-Seps, you know that if you go to the File pull-down menu and come down to Automate, you normally would see the plugins here. The plugins no longer reside here. They're actually here, but they're hidden as a security measure. So there'll be some things that will throw you off if you're a current user of the program. You will no longer find the plugins under the Automate menu, and you will not be working out of the Actions panel. By the way, T-Seps 3.0 Separation Suite loads an action in the Actions panel, but you don't work from it. So you may see your Actions panel actually be loaded with a new action, but we work from this panel right here. Now, this panel is a typical panel in that we can dock it. Now, typically, I like my computer laid out a certain way. This is called the preferences in Photoshop, how we like our panels. Each of you have your own preferences. I like to have the channels panel available. I like to have the layers panel available. I like to have history available. I don't need a lot of the rest. And some of you have a lot of panels going on, and I know that you don't use them that often. Just get rid of some of those. Close them out. Now, I'm in T-Seps, of course, Photoshop CS6 and CSCC, and for those of you that are the power users, you know that you can change the interface. I happen to not like the real dark interface. I find it a little too dark, and so I'm going to be working in a little lighter interface, but this is the new Photoshop interface. I kind of call it the gamer photographer interface. I happen to be used to Photoshop the way it looks in all the previous versions. Okay, you've got T-Seps loaded. The panel should look like this. You can shorten, lengthen. You can do this. A typical panel. You can move it around. You can minimize it to give you more screen space. So it's just a very typical panel. Now, there's a couple things you have to do still before we're done getting set up. Photoshop is set up now out of the box to allow all the files to open as what's called a tab. And that means if you open multiple files, there's tabs, and the files are all kind of in one container. I tend to like to turn that off, but we have to leave that turned on to run T-Seps. And this is under the interface, and it's called Open Documents as Tabs. I typically like to keep this turned off prior to CS6, but in CS6 there's a bug. And the bug is that Photoshop will not find a previous file, meaning if I have more than one file open, and I'm looking to look to the previous file, as T-Seps often does, it can't find it unless it's opened as a tab. They call it Open Documents as tabs. So that has to be checked. So make sure that's checked. If you've got CS6 running and you don't like opening documents as tabs, you have to go back and recheck that now. Now the last thing to do is we have to go to color settings. And in the old days, I would have you make some of these settings automatically, and these settings adjust how the channels display. We want to display the channels with dot gain applied. We want to make sure and tell it that if we're going to do a CMYK separation, we tell it what the settings are, and we would in the old days tell you how to do this. Today, with T-Seps 3.0, you get a settings folder, and the file is called T-Seps Color Settings. If you load this, it does all this for you automatically. And so once you've done this, by the way, you don't have to come back here. Now, Color Settings is a menu in Photoshop, and Photoshop writes all these changes to its own preferences file. You all know that if you open Photoshop, every now and then Photoshop will open up with all your panels in the default location. Everything's been changed back. It means Photoshop lost the settings for the preferences. And if that happens, you've got to go back and reload them. You'll know if it lost the settings if you go to Edit, Color Settings, and you don't see it say T-Seps Color Settings here. You know that Photoshop lost or trashed the preference file. And it just makes a new one based on its default, so you've got to reload those settings. So now we're set up. We've got the panel open. We've got the color settings set. We have the open document as tabs set. We've got the manual cracked open. Again, this is the kind of stuff that T-Seps likes. Let's talk first about the artwork preparation. We open up a couple files here. You all know what that means, artwork to fix. Here's the problem. You're going to be getting in low quality artwork. I do separations all day long, and I just get stuff in that's, I have good customers who send me good high-res stuff. They build in AI, and we're going to talk about how to build stuff in AI and Corel and keep it nice and sharp. But typically what you get in is stuff that was at the time maybe a nice high-res file, but now it's a low-quality JPEG. Somewhere along the line, somebody saved this file too many times as a low-quality JPEG, and you get this kind of stuff. And the problem is T-Seps, working with an RGB file, will often take the green, combine it with the blue, do a mask around it, and you can see if you look at the RGB by itself, you can see it's junk. This stuff is going to get worse when you separate it. Sometimes you run a set of separations and go, where did that come from? And if you reopen the file and look at just the red, the green, or the blue channel by themselves, you see this stuff. You don't see it quite so bad when the RGB is on as a composite. But when you're looking at the individual channels, you see this. This is called, I call these the boxes. This is from JPEG files averaging things out. When you make a low-quality JPEG, it kind of says, okay, I'll take this group right here, this section, and I'll just average it out. And so a JPEG file is really junky. Now, T-Seps has a nice routine under optional routines, improve image quality, and one is called improve low-quality JPEG. Now, watch what happens here. This routine is going to, of course, prompt you and tell you what's going to happen, and it works on a file that is open. It's going to cook, do some gobbledygook. Now, you'll notice the file is a hair softer, but it's definitely cleaner now. We have all the little artifacts, we call them, removed. And so now the file is much, much better. Well, it's going to separate much better. I'd rather have the file a hair softer than have all those boxes. So you want to always take a look at the original artwork. Here are the key points to the original artwork. The artwork needs to be at the final image size. Again, I get files all day long that are always, I just can't believe, they're always 72 dpi and they're low physical size. You always go to image size, and you check the file size and the resolution. This is the right physical size, I'm guessing. It's 13 inches wide. And you would typically upsample the file. And upsample simply means make it the right resolution. And I want to be typically working at 300 dpi at the final size. Now, sometimes Photoshop will play with your mind a little bit. It'll actually switch to centimeters, and then you get spooked, and you made this file 12 centimeters by 300 dpi. You got to make sure it always says inches if you're thinking in inches. If you're thinking in centimeters, then typically a 12-inch file will be about 30 centimeters. So you always upsample the file. Now, upsampling means the file may get softer because you're taking a file that was not real sharp to begin with, but you need to get it the right physical size. especially if you plan on adding more text to this file. If you plan on doing more graphic elements with this file and doing more in building it, if you build it at low res and then upsample it, all the things you added to it, including type, are now low res. You want to build it, bring the file up, upsample it to 300 dpi at the final physical size. And I like to have rulers on, by the way. And if you go to View, one of your checkboxes is Rulers. If you're new to Photoshop, by the way, there's some really good training videos online at the T-Seps training video section on Photoshop. In fact, there's over 25 videos. Most of them are done in T-Seps 2.0, but the basic tweaking of the files and running of the routines after you've pushed the button works the same in 2.0 and 3.0. 3.0 just is running better with different routines. I like to keep rulers on so I can kind of see what's going on here, see what the file is. So you must know what it is. You must know what the image size resolution is. Again, I get files all the time, and I will send people back, and I'll say, this file is only 72 dpi, and the response typically is, oh, I didn't know that. Also, people will send me files and say, will this work for separating? And sometimes I'll zoom in real close, and I'll make sure they know that this file is not sharp. And I'll always email back, did you use the zoom tool? If you ever took any of my seminars in the past, you'll know that I use it quite often. It's a kind of a little tongue-in-cheek. Did you zoom in on it? And typically people don't. They look at the file like this and go, wow, that looks great. But you've got to zoom in because there's no magic. T-Seps sees what it sees. In fact, the problem is T-Seps does not see a hard black edge here. It sees gray levels, and it sees a darker blue and a lighter blue. And it's going to give you separation for that. You're going to get these halos around your images because a separation program separates what it sees. Now, a lot of you are going to be working in AI or Corel and building images there. And of course, if it's just basic spot color, you don't need T-Seps, although T-Seps works well with spot color. But you're going to build an image with lots of gradations and shading, and maybe you place a photograph in it or a other image. When you bring the image into Photoshop, Photoshop will obviously open up a native AI, Adobe Illustrator file. It will open up a PDF, it'll open up a PSD, a TIFF, a JPEG. But you know if it's a TIFF or a JPEG or a PSD, it's a pixel-based file. You know that if it's an EPS or an AI, it is probably a vector file. And so let's do this. I'm going to open up this PDF file. And this is very important. When you open a PDF, you get this window, and it's set default to a resolution of 72 dpi with anti-aliasing turned on. And this is real important. If with anti-aliasing turned on, Photoshop says, I want to soften these edges. I'm not going to give you the exact resolution of the file. I'm going to try and soften the edges so it's going to print really cool to an inkjet printer. And we don't want it to do that. And if you blow by this window, here's what you get. I'm going to say OK, brings the file up. I'm going to zoom in on it. That's what we got. Not only do we have a jagged edge, by the way, these checks in the background mean it's a transparent background. That's what you want. When you bring in a file from a vector program, you want no background. You don't want the shirt color to be part of it, by the way. I get files all the time that are built in AI or Corel, and the shirt color's there, or maybe there's even a little shirt graphic. That's cool to show the customer, but you don't need that to separate. The shirt color you don't separate that color. I sometimes say it has nothing to do with the separations. It does in that it'll help you to know how much to boost an underbase and how much to block the shirt from showing through. But in actually pulling colors, the shirt has nothing to do with it. But look at this. This was a vector file. We just screwed this file up. And this is the kind of stuff I get where I know the file was vector at one time, and I know that somebody opened it and thought, well, I'll send Scott the JPEG. He can use a JPEG. And I get that kind of a file. Let me close this file out. Let's do this one more time. File, open. I'm going to turn off anti-aliasing, and because this is a vector file, and I know some of you are my vector snobs, and don't take that the wrong way, but it means that you really hate to see pixels, and you really want to try and emulate higher resolution. You know, with faster computers, look at this file is only going to be 4.97 megabytes. I could make this thing 600 dpi, and it's going to be not a very big file. Let's see what this file is in size, inches. Let's make this thing a little bigger. So it's 41 megabytes, not a big deal. I've turned off anti-aliasing. I've turned the resolution to a pretty high resolution. Now we zoom in. That's what we're talking about. That's what we want to separate from. Notice there's no soft edges. There's jaggies, yes, but we're zoomed way in on it. And these are going to go away when we put this on screen mesh, convert the halftone dots, print it on that shirt. But there's no little softening, which is the anti-aliasing, because anti-aliasing is going to give you that little lighter color that T-Seps is going to see. It's going to separate that second color. We want to see the colors nice and clean. So it's very important when working in AI or Corel to either save as a PDF, or if you're in AI, just save it as an AI, turn off the shirt color. If you're in Corel, you can export as a PDF or export as an EPS. And again, when you open these files up, you get that window, and you can't blow by that window. Now, one of the confusing things about using a program like T-Seps is how to prepare the artwork to separate. And the confusing thing is, I'll just bring up files I use way too often, but I'll bring them up because they tell the story. By the way, see how they open up the tabs? I hate that because now we can't really kind of see we have two files open. I will undock them. You can always undock them. It says it has to be set to open as a tab for Photoshop to run correctly with T-Seps. Somehow, some way, you need two versions of the art. Now, I know some other programs use just a transparent background, but that's deceiving. This is a pretty clean file here, but if this file had a vignetted edge, a very soft edge, then it would be harder to create what I call the masked version. Think of it this way. If this is the only file you got from the customer, that's the file you got from the customer, and he says, I want this on black shirts. Well, the area around the artwork is called the canvas, and the canvas is white. Now, T-Seps doesn't know that this is canvas. T-Seps sees a graphic image, and it sees white as a color. And if you separate with T-Seps now, with just this file, T-Seps will then make a white underbase, of course, for the entire design, but it's also going to give you white around the image. It is not that smart. I'm still amazed at people that think that maybe the program would know that this is the image and the area around it is not the image. This is called canvas. To make a traditional underbase, we would actually convert this file to grayscale and invert it, meaning make a negative of it. If I make a negative of that, I'll do it right now. Image mode, grayscale. And then we will do image adjustments, invert. That's like making a negative. Now, this center portion is an underbase. It's not a great underbase because there's not enough color under the black, under the red. This is the red airplane. I want to put more base below it. So a good underbase does a lot more than this. But this is a good underbase as a start. But the problem is there's black around the image. If this is what my film looks like, and I output this film and burn a screen, I'm going to be printing white ink around the image. So we don't want to do that. I'm going to go back in history, open the file up. If I had this as my file and I wanted to make an underbase, image mode, grayscale. Again, T-Seps does all this for you, and this is just a very basic underbase. If I now invert this, that's my film for the underbase. No, there's nothing around it. So this is what we call this masking, and masking is an old camera term where we would actually cut rubylith masks around images. So somehow, some way, you need two versions of the art, and the reason is this. T-Seps uses the mask, or the black version, to create only the underbase and highlight. It doesn't pull the colors. It only uses this version to make the underbase and highlight. If your design is only going on a white shirt, you don't need this image. You need just a white image. If your design is only going on a black shirt and you don't plan to print black ink on that shirt, you're going to have shirt be the black, then you just need this image. And you're going to get this kind of artwork where sometimes it's that rock and roll, that metal look, where it's a real freeform image on a black shirt. All you need is that version of the artwork. But if you need any design that has to have an underbase, or for a pastel shirt or a black shirt, and also needs black as a color, because we can't pull black from this image, because we're going to be pulling black around it. If I want to pull black for the airplanes and for all the detail, I've got to work from the white image. If you're going to be working on images that work on light and dark shirts or pastel colored shirts, you need two versions of the art. Now, if this is all you got from the customer, making a black version is not that bad. If I click on Magic Wand and click, it selects around it. Now, this is a simple design, has a hard edge. If it had a soft edge, I may have to adjust what's called the tolerance setting in Magic Wand. And the tolerance setting would be up here at the top. But if I now go to Edit, Fill, and fill my selection with black, there's my mask version. I'm going to do a select, deselect, take off the little marching ants. There's my black version. So somehow, some way, you have to make a black version of the artwork. Now, if you have a choice, ask the customer for a version that has a transparent background. If you have a choice, and you know they build it in by the way, if they build it in AI or Corel, you know that when you bring it in, it's going to have a transparent background. Let's just go back to the file we looked at a second ago. Now remember, Photoshop remembers the settings. That's the beauty. Photoshop remembers your settings from last time, but the default is 72 and anti-alias turned on. We want to turn that off. Again, I'm going to make this about 400 dpi just for this example. Say OK, and the file comes in with checks. That means that if I look at the layers panel, There's transparent background. Now, old school way of doing the two versions is make a new layer, make a new layer, fill this layer with black, fill this layer with white, duplicate the file, and then flatten the image for the black layer. I'll just do it right now. Image, duplicate. I'm going to now flatten, because the file must be flattened and it must be RGB, flatten. There's my black version right there, done. Save it off as Fight Against Breast Cancer Black, or whatever we're going to call it. Go back to my original, turn off the black layer, flatten this image, discard the black layer, and voila, there we have the two versions of the art ready to go. Now, T-Seps is pretty smart now. Let's do this. We don't want to save that. Close this out. And yes, I'm going to get the running routines here in a second, but this is important because I can't tell you how many times people run routines and then they do all the tweaks, or they do the JPEG enhancement. If you get a file like this, T-Seps has a button that does this. If I go to simulated process, click on that, get back to my simulated routine or my index routine, the button's still there. It's called create two versions of the artwork. The button is still there. If I get a file that has a transparent background and no additional layers, that's it, RGB, transparent background, click on the button. It tells you what it's going to do, and it does what I just did, only automatically. Boom, done, finished. There's the black version. There's the white version, and we save them off as black and white. If you look at my computer, you'll see that I have thousands of files called black and white. Don't let this bog you down. Watch the online video on this. There's a video on this that was shot in T-Seps 2.0. It's just you have to buy into it. The problem you're going to have sometimes is images that have black type, and you're going to go on a black shirt. I get that all the time, and I haven't got probably a good sample here. But you get that where it's got black type, and or in the case of this design, it has black outline around the lettering. Hard to see maybe on your monitor, but you have to decide what to do with that black outline. And so sometimes people get confused because T-Seps doesn't know what to do with some of that stuff. So that's how we kind of get the artwork up to speed. And there's certainly, you can spend a lot of time preparing the artwork. Frankly, running routines takes about 30 seconds for the main routines and then some tweaks. But if the artwork isn't done correctly, you'll spend a lot of time cleaning things up. What will happen is you'll miss anti-aliasing is checked, you'll run a set of separations, and now all your colors have halos around them because of the softened edges, and you end up spending 20 minutes erasing those softened edges. Or you run a routine and find that the JPEG was so bad and it got worse, and you wish you would have run the enhanced JPEG routine first. Now, what routines do you run? T-Seps has routines for simulated process, index color, CMYK, spot color, and then kind of a fun routine, which is monochrome, old photo, black and white routine. Again, I do separations all day long, and I say typically because now with T-Seps 3 I do it a little differently, but I typically run the standard 9-color routine. Now I know if you're running only a 6-color press, this is more than you want to print, but typically the 9-color routine gives you choices. What you need is choices. T-Seps will typically work off of a predetermined color palette, and you want choices. Now I say I typically run the 9-color. I've been doing that for years, but now with T-Seps 3 I've got a routine that runs additional blues if my design has water, boats, fish, because I know I'm going to have a turquoise in that water, but typically for most designs I don't have much of a turquoise. I know if I'm going to do a design for like Harley or with flames, I want to run the flames routine. I know if I want to do a design with flesh tones, I want to run the flesh routine. In the older T-Seps it was an optional routine, but now with T-Seps 3.0 it gives you a lot more flesh choices. So now I would take a look and I might run these routines, but typically I will run the 9-color routine. I'm going to redock T-Seps back here. So to run a program, you click on a button. I'm just going to run a 9-color routine first to show you how simple it is. Click a button. It always prompts you. So if you're new to the program, you read the prompts. After a while, you blow by them. But in the beginning, you read them because they pretty much tell you what's going to happen here. It just says open the black or the masked file first and open the unmasked or the white file second. The file must be closed when you run a routine. Again, I can't tell you how many times people will say there's a problem, they're getting an error, and they say, I had the file open and I ran a routine. In fact, it's funny, T-Seps 3 tells you at the very top header, it says the file must be closed before running of the separation routines. And so make sure the file's closed, and make sure the file is RGB with no additional layers hanging out there, no additional channels. I'll show you in a second what I mean, but it needs to be RGB and flattened. It says lots of colors going on. And the program just cooks. It's kind of fun to watch, and you can actually click on the channels panel while it's running. You can click, just do a little click, and it'll change your panel to the channels so you can actually see it cook. It just cooks. It's actually analyzing the art. It's determining the print sequence, adjusting for dot gain, doing all the gobbledygook. Probably doing about 500 mouse clicks. This is why I got tired of teaching this process, because it was just too hard to teach. It's easier to just let T-Seps do the heavy lifting, because the hard part is always fixing bad art, and the hard part is always kind of doing a little tweaking afterwards to try and make the customer real happy. A design like this is probably somewhat forgiving. I think if we can name most of the key colors, the customer will be happy. There's no probably real Pantone matches. Maybe the guy that owns a motorcycle is going to insist that it's this maroon color. But as long as we come close on a design like this. Now, again, don't forget that Photoshop opened it as the tab as a document. So we're going to move it away. And typically what I will do is I will immediately save this file as Seps. And then I will typically open up the white version and have it side by side. Now, I typically multi-monitor. I'm actually multi-monitoring for this workshop, but you can only see one of them. So typically, I will put it right here so I can see it. And I will typically make my panel a little narrower. So here's my separations. T-Seps always defaults to a black shirt. If I double-click, there's my shirt color. I'm going to change this by clicking. And then when I get color picker, just drive it off the edge. Dead white is 255 levels of RGB. Say OK. Now, T-Seps gives you optional underbases. I'm not going to worry about those for right now because I'm looking at a white shirt. Don't be put off by the fact that we're seeing black and I said it's a white shirt. In Photoshop, if you're looking at one channel by itself, it shows the channel in black and white. And the shirt color is in black because it's filled with rocks. It's hard to describe, but people go, why isn't it? It's filled, it's colored white, but it's been filled with a solid fill so that when you show it with all the channels on, it shows as white because we painted it white, but it was filled. I like to just use the analogy. I filled it with rocks. I painted the rocks white. So when you put eyes on more than one channel, they display in color. Now, I know, more colors than you want to print, but you see it kind of comes together. Not bad. Now, your choices are to now start reducing color count if you're on like a 6-color press. Now, T-Seps has a 5-color routine that will reduce the color count. The problem with that routine is the green. It makes green out of blue and yellow, and green out of blue and yellow is not very good. This design, I think, needs green on its own. It's got quite a bit of green here, kind of a fluorescent green. I think it needs it by itself. And so now we're going to start removing colors. Let's see what happens if I reduce the color count. I'm going to take the gray, and I'm going to drop the gray down to the trash bin down below. Just delete it. There's the brown. I don't think I need the brown. A little bit of deal on the car. Probably don't need the pink. Maybe I need the pink. Look at the flags in the background. So you start playing with it. Start tweaking. T-Seps gives you optional blacks. This is going to give you a solid black. A solid meaning it has all the black image and also the black for shadows. But sometimes when you print a black like this, you're going to get the dark blacks looking good. But if you get them looking nice and dark, all the halftone blacks gain on you and they close up on you. So I give you an optional black that's just the halftones, and I give you a black that's just the spot colors. If you have enough press heads, you might want to print 2 blacks, one for the spot, one for the halftone black. If you have not enough press heads, you print the 1 black. Let's change the shirt color to something other than white so we can look at the underbases. We'll just make it a popular shirt color right now is seem to be charcoal gray. Now, T-Seps gives you 2 different underbase choices. You're going to pick the one that's the best. One is higher contrast. That's the underbase. One is a little flatter. Sometimes the flatter one gives you a little more detail, though. I'm going to keep the flatter underbase. You can see I'm just dropping colors out. I'm going to click on the yellow, click on the pink, the light blue, green, the scarlet red, the blue, the brown, the black. Now we do tweaks. I think it's looking pretty good. I might click on the underbase channel. Where you're going to live is tone curve. If I go to image, adjustments, curves. The shortcut is Control-M on a PC and Command-M on a Mac. Click on curves. Think of the curve as being, this is the shadow dark areas of the underbase. I'm selected on the underbase channel, by the way, so that's where I'm working on. This is the lightest areas up at the upper right. This is called the midtone. I'm reducing the midtone. I'm boosting the midtone. Too much, too much, too much. To get the idea. Now, I think I probably need the pink. Take the pink off. See the difference in the flags in the background right in here? But can I afford pink? T-Seps has buttons that let you combine channels. I find them a little cumbersome, only if you're new to Photoshop, they're real handy, and they make it all real automated for you. And it's called combined channels. But the truth is, once you kind of get, as a power user with T-Seps, you realize that to combine the pink with the red, that's what I want to do. You select the red, and you go to Image, Apply Image. We're going to apply the pink to the red. We're going to tell it we want to apply the pink. And by the way, I had the pink turned off. By the way, look back here. You can see it. I had the pink turned off so I could see it. I just sent everything on the pink channel to the red channel. But I don't want to send it all because it's going to be red. I want to make it pink. I want to make it 50%. I'm going to say OK. And if you've taken any of my webinars or seminars in the past, you've heard me say I got a color for free. I got pink for free. Do I need two blues? I probably do. That's the problem with the blue. The light baby blue can't be made from a tint of the darker blue. It just doesn't happen. You've got to pretty much always use the two blues. So that's a problem. Now, a customer is forgiving and all you can print is 5 or 6 colors. You may have to decide which blue you want to keep. But that's the problem. Do I need the brown? That gives me a little detail in the card. On, off, on, off. I can almost always get brown for free by selecting the red channel and going to Apply Image and send the brown to the red, probably 60%. And done. Got brown for free. All right. Do I need the highlight? Well, it's kind of neat, but if I can't afford it, I'll dump it. I'm down to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. What do I have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. If I need to actually print this on a 6-color press, I may have to actually possibly combine the blues. Now, the black is a little weak. That's okay. The black is going to gain at press. I would rather have the black weaker than heavier. I could click on the black channel, go to Image, Adjustments, Curves, pop that black a little bit, just a hair, make it look a little better. I feel warm and fuzzy about it, but I know it's going to get darker at press. I'd rather leave the black weak. T-Seps typically leaves the black a little weaker. Now the red motorcycle, kind of the maroon motorcycle, looks pretty good. The red looks good in the banner, but I know that I need more red on this. I told you you're going to live at the tone curve. You're also going to live at Dodge Burn tool right here. Little lollipop called the Dodge tool. You want to have it always set for shadows. I say always loosely because sometimes you'll set it for midtones or for highlights, but set it for shadows. This is how much. You don't want it to be 100% because it's going to just be way overkill for you. And the tool has a tip to it. Hope you can see the tip on your screen. If I right mouse click, I can make the tip bigger. Those of you that drive Photoshop know that all the tools have a brush tip. I'm going to hold down the Alt key because I'm on a PC, which makes this now the burn tool. I'm going to burn in some red here. Beautiful, beautiful. I like that. By the way, I picked up some red in the car back here. I'm doing now just without the Alt key held down. I'm just doing the dodge. Dodge is lightening. Burning is darkening. So you're going to take a little bit of time and do a little dodge burn. Kind of play with it a little bit. This design looks pretty clean. A little dodge burn there, and I'm done. Finish, print this thing out. So now your choices are, by the way, let's close this file out, the original. Let's save this. Now, if you are printing to a rip, like T-rip, Photoshop CS6, if you're a normal user of the program, you know that there's no longer a screen button. You're going to actually convert the file to halftone dots. Before doing that, you want to add registration marks. And I've given you a lot of different options. These are obviously bigger than the Photoshop marks, other than the small 1/4 inch marks are not much bigger than the Photoshop marks. This routine is all automated. You can now put targets in the centers, top, bottom, and sides. Centers only are the 4 corners. And basically, you need to give the file registration marks. Let's move the channels panel off here so we can see the channels. And we're just going to click. And it's going to cook. And now we have these honking targets. Now some of you think those are too big, but the truth is those are not bad. They're a little big for this design. These targets are based on the resolution of the file. This file may not have been 300 dpi. That's the problem. I use typically a little lower res files for demos because they run faster, especially if you're doing an online session. If at 300 dpi, these targets would be smaller. It tells you at the bottom of the target window, these target sizes are based on the file being 300 dpi resolution. But now we have targets on all the files. And now we can tell T-Seps to create halftone dots. We can convert this file to individual files where each file is individual, and the actual channel header, which is this, and typically I don't leave these the way they are. I want to have more information. I don't want to have it say under optional underbase low contrast. I will always click on the channel header, and I will typically now put in the mesh count. I would typically do the 230 mesh on this, on a lighter dark shirt. I'll call this underbase white. I will typically put flash after. Channel headers print on the films. And I think it's nice for production guys and the screen makers to see what's going on here. T-Seps doesn't do this because it doesn't know the print order because you deleted some channels, and it doesn't know if you're in inches or centimeters. If you're in centimeters, a 90 mesh or a 230 mesh is a 90 mesh. If you're in centimeters, a 305 is a 120. I'll do all these, and that way when I print the individual channels out as halftones, this information is now the file name. So the file name has this information right here. That is the print order, mesh count, and the Pantone color. Now, people sometimes freak on the colors. They'll go, I can't find lemon yellow from my Wilflex color. I've given you the Pantone call out. Just try and come close to these colors. I mean, we're trying to use lemon yellow, scarlet red, green is a typical like a medium green, and just try and come close to these colors if you can. Now, if I click on Convert Separations to Individual Pre-Halftone Files, it'll make actually 7 separations here. There's 7. And it'll make them all halftone dots. That routine takes a while to run. It takes about 3 or 4 minutes to run. I'm not going to run it in this workshop. But what I want to do really is I want to convert the file to separations that are halftone and put back as channels. That way I can see what it's going to look like. Let me show you what I mean by that. This is one that I already did. And this routine to convert the file to halftones and then put it back together again takes about 5 minutes to run, which is why I'm not doing it in the workshop. But if I now click on each channel for this design and zoom in, it's already halftoned. Now the beauty of this routine, by the way, is I can actually preview it in color. I can see what it's going to look like on the shirt. And by the way, a routine that will let me merge all these channels together and make this one RGB file that you could then print out on an inkjet printer and show your customer as the real proof. You know, they get a little freaked out. You show them a nice high gloss proof and then you give them a shirt and it's got halftone dots. So this is a very cool routine. And by the way, now the file is already halftoned, ready to send to a printer. I could now print this to an inkjet printer, and if I have one of the newer printers like the Epson 1400 and 1430 that use dye-based ink and they print pretty dark, if I print at the highest photo setting to an inkjet printer without a rip is what kind of does the ink control and does halftones, but now I don't need it. I can print this to a regular inkjet printer at the highest photo setting, and I'm going to get a good-looking film. If I want to print to my RIP, I can. T-RIP or any of the RIPs you might have. A RIP does control ink deposit on any of the non-dye-based printers that use pigment ink. You may want to print to a RIP. So the file is now pre-halftoned. By the way, this routine lets you see mistakes. You'll see where maybe the color wasn't 100%, and that's a key thing. Let me close this file out. Now, I said that there's two areas so far you're going to live at. You're going to live at tone curve, you're going to live at dodge burn tool, and the last one is you're going to open up a panel called info. This is critical. I live at the info panel, and I'll tell you why. The info panel reads areas of density. If I click on the underbase by itself on this design, and I have the info panel open, and I have my eyedropper as my cursor, if I move the eyedropper around, see what it reads? This is a good example. It's reading 97%, 96%. I know that on this file, back in this area back here, I need solid underbase on a black shirt. If I make it 97%, it's going to be on the film halftoned. In fact, that's where that routine, the pre-halftones the files. You'll see areas that you think were 100%, you'll see they're halftoned, and you wonder why. The info palette doesn't lie. and info panel. They used to call these palettes. Now it's called panels. So you read the areas that you know should be 100%, and you read areas that are really faint, real weak, like that's 41%. We know we could burn that on a screen. You'll see areas that are really, really light, like in front of this tire, that's 13%. Well, we could burn that. If you can't burn less than like a 7 or 8% dot, that's okay. You want to try and burn down to a 5% dot, but we're going to read that. So how do we fix it? If I go to Image, Adjustments, Curves, the info panel, by the way, is always live, meaning it now reads before and after. See it? I'm going to move the curve in just a little bit on the shadow area, and now I'm going to read the info panel. Close. 100%. That's what I want. I'm going to say OK. If I came in too far and I felt maybe I darkened the midtones, I'd bring this back a little bit. That's before, after. Before, after. I'm going to say OK. And we're going to work through every separation. Now we know that in this case, this Todd Harding, that needs to be solid yellow. Let's just see if it is. And if you wonder why it's not, it's because T-Seps may see a yellow that isn't quite what you wanted. That is 100% yellow. That's what I wanted. That's perfect. The light blue, most of the light blue is halftones. And by the way, see all this stuff here, these shadows? This is because this file had a lot of, it was saved at one time, not by me, with anti-aliasing turned on, and you can see the softening of the edges, and T-Seps sees that. And then what it does is it puts that on the actual films. You're going to see that as a highlight, as a halo, and you spend time erasing this stuff. This is where the anti-aliasing turned off is key. Otherwise, you're going to get this kind of stuff. And how do you fix this kind of stuff? Well, we'll do it quickly. You pick up the lasso tool, and I just did just that, just to show you. And I just pressed the delete key on the keyboard. I filled it with white, and I deleted it. And when I do separations, sometimes I kick and scream where I've got to spend a half hour fixing stuff like this. Let's check the green. The green's not bad. Let's check the red. We know that this banner should be red in it. I'm reading with the info panel, and by the way, any of the tools you have open will read it. I'm on the zoom tool. Reads it right there. So the info panel is key. I leave it open. I leave it below the channels panel all the time. It's open all the time. I check every separation before I finalize it and make sure the areas that should be 100% are definitely 100%. So now we could actually say print and print this file out, and we know the mesh count, we know the print order, and it's a pretty clean deal. Now let's go back to index separation. I'm going to cover this quickly because I'm going to run out of time. I wanted to spend the most time on the simulated process because that's the routine you're going to run the most often. And again, if you have only a 6-color press, you might run the 5-color routine. Let me do this real quick. I'm going to run the 5-color on the same design. You'll see that it actually works. It's the green will suffer. But then again, if the customer is forgiving and all he's paid you for is 6 colors, then it may be okay. Let it cook. It'll well on the blues and the reds. It's going to give you still the 2 underbase choices. So you can see the key to the program is to get the artwork correct before you run the routines. Do the best you can to fix the artwork. It's hard to fix it after the fact. Then the key is to, after you've done separations, don't be shy about info panel. Don't be shy about doing little tweaks, lightening areas, darkening areas. Be bold. I will sometimes get sample separations in from customers that will say, I ran your program and it did okay, but I think it could have done better. What do you think? And I'll come back and I'll go, what tweaks did you do? And they'll go back, I didn't do any. And I'll come back and say, well, watch this. I boosted the underbase a little bit and it looks great. And they'll go, wow, I didn't know I could do that. Well, if you read the manual, it's all about doing the final tweaks. All right, so let's take a look at this now real quick. Undock this. See what we have on a black shirt. There's the underbase. There's the yellow. Light blue, red, blue, black. See the green? The green is not bad, but it's kind of a, kind of a dirty green, kind of a lime green when you mix yellow and blue. But it still works. And so this design now can be a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, I said 7 colors. We don't print black on a black shirt. And on a light shirt, we don't print an underbase. This can actually be a 6-color print on a light or a dark shirt. You're going to burn 7 screens, and you're going to swap those 2 screens out, depending on if it's a light or a dark shirt. And the same tweaks apply. Click on the red, click on the motorcycle, the Dodge Burn tool, click on the underbase and pop it a little bit. Okay, I'm going to quickly cover a couple more routines. I'll do a second webinar next week on the other programs I haven't covered in this because there's just not enough time to cover them all. But index color works well for some designs. I would say that about a third of the jobs I get in, the customer has said, make it index color, or what you think is best, Scott. I run index probably 1 out of 40 designs. It's a nice routine. Indexing makes the entire design out of pixels. But the problem is a lot of your screen burners will have a hard time burning the screens. They'll freak when they see them. And so I typically run indexing only as a last resort sometimes. Sometimes indexing does a really nice job. Indexing lets you pick the color from the design. And when you run the routine, it pretty much says what colors are in the design, and you pick those colors. And so it actually separates based on the colors in your design. That's really cool. And I'm just showing it to here because this is a routine that I rarely run, and I don't have time to cover it in this webinar. But I just wanted to show you that indexing can be very cool. Here's the deal. Some of you will send me files and say, what routine would you run? And my response is always very friendly, and what routine did you run? Because it takes 30 seconds. And I want you to be bold and brave and not be shy. Click a button, run a routine, see what happens. T-Seps displays on the monitor, very accurate. So if you have a routine and maybe you think color isn't quite right, tweak it, boost it. With indexing, you can't do much but boost the underbase. But in this design, I think it looks pretty good, although I think it's a little dark in this wave. I would go to Image, Adjustments, Curves, and I would boost the underbase. Don't be shy. Besides my common response of, did you use the zoom tool, my common response is be bold and brave, and don't be afraid to make tweaks. Typically by boosting the underbase, it's all it needs for a dark shirt is sometimes the base is just needs to be popped a little bit. That is the basic program. Now I want you to be bold and kind of work through all these other menus. There's lots going on here. If you need additional training and support, if you click on the support button down below at the bottom, it actually links you to the most current online support page. I'm updating this page right now to include more support for T-Seps 3. This computer is online, but it's kind of sluggish to bring it up. But it takes you actually online. You're still in Photoshop, by the way. You never leave Photoshop. It takes you to the most current support page. The user's manual is also available here, but it's actually easier if you print it out. I think you need to bring up the PDF and print it out. This page takes you to the most current online training videos. And so if you need additional help or support, this page, the training videos, there's over 25 videos. Now most of them online right now were done in T-Seps 2.0. But as far as the tweaks and fixing the artwork and all that, that's all the same. That hasn't changed. It's just the basic running the routines a little different in T-Seps 3.0. But there's over 25 videos. And if you're new to Photoshop, you really want to watch the Photoshop videos. Those are excellent. It's pretty much me teaching you how to use Photoshop, and it covers all the key points. And this is all done right directly from within the program. That's all I've got. You can email me direct to scott@tbiznetwork.com. I answer questions all the time. That's all I've got for today. I hope you enjoyed this webinar. I'm going to be doing more webinars with more in-depth. I'm doing a webinar on Friday on the doing more aggressive tweaks to programs. I hope to see you there. Thanks a lot. Enjoy talking with you guys. Bye-bye.